The polar bear covered in barnacles, a fight for survival. The Arctic was a world of silence, interrupted only by the soft crackling of drifting ice and the distant howls of the wind. A research boat moved cautiously through the frozen expanse, its engines humming quietly as it navigated between towering icebergs. Dr. Mark Reynolds, an experienced wildlife researcher, stood at the helm, his gloved hands gripping a pair of binoculars. The mission had been routine, observing Arctic wildlife, tracking migration patterns and collecting data on climate change. But today, something felt different. "Keep an eye out," Mark instructed his team. "The ice is shifting faster than usual." Beside him, Emma Carter, a marine biologist, adjusted her camera lens. "Something's up ahead," she murmured, pointing toward the icy horizon. Mark followed her gaze, and his heart clenched. A polar bear, one of the Arctic's greatest survivors, was struggling in the freezing waters. At first, it didn't make sense. Polar bears were excellent swimmers, built for endurance, capable of traveling miles across the sea in search of food. But this one, it wasn't swimming. It was fighting to stay afloat. The team immediately sprang into action. The boat shifted, course moving closer but cautiously. As they neared, the true horror became clear. The bear's body was covered in barnacles. Clusters of dark, hardened shells clung to its fur, weighing it down like chains. The barnacles had latched onto its legs, belly, and even parts of its neck. Every time the bear moved, the sharp edges of the shells scraped against its skin, leaving behind raw, bloody wounds. The sight was gut-wrenching. Mark exhaled sharply. "This isn't normal." Emma shook her head, her voice barely above a whisper. "I've never seen anything like this before." The bear let out a weak, strained growl, a sound so unnatural for such a powerful creature that it sent a chill down Mark's spine. The team watched as it struggled to lift a paw, only for its leg to tremble under the weight of the barnacles. Every movement looked painful. "This poor thing," whispered Jacob, the youngest member of the team. His voice cracked. How did this even happen? No one had an immediate answer. Barnacles were common in marine life, often attaching to whales, sea turtles, and even man-made structures. But a polar bear, it was unheard of. Mark's mind raced through possibilities. Had the bear been trapped in the water for too long? Maybe, caught in melting sea ice, unable to climb out. Or perhaps an injury had slowed it down, allowing the barnacles to take hold. Whatever the reason, the outcome was clear. This bear was dying. The bear's head bobbed forward, its massive frame trembling as it tried to keep itself above the water. Its fur, once pristine white, was matted and dirty. Its strength was fading. "We can't just watch," Emma said, her voice urgent. Mark nodded. "We need to help, now." But the situation was dangerous. Despite its weakened state, the bear was still a wild animal. If they got too close, it could lash out in fear or desperation, and with the unpredictable ice shifting around them, one wrong move could send the entire boat into the freezing abyss. Mark turned to his team. "We're going to approach slowly. No sudden movements. We need to see if it's strong enough to climb onto the ice." The crew maneuvered the boat closer, the water dark and unwelcoming beneath them. The bear tried to paddle, its muscles straining, but it barely moved an inch. It was drowning in plain sight. Emma clenched her fists. "If we don't do something soon, it won't last another hour." Jacob swallowed hard. "We have to find a way to get it onto the ice." The bear's eyes flickered toward the boat for the first time, a moment of recognition. Was it fear? Curiosity? Or perhaps a silent plea for help? Then it happened. The bear's body lurched dangerously low into the water. Its limbs trembled violently before suddenly going still. Panic surged through the team. "It's going under," Emma cried. Mark's heart pounded. They were running out of time. The Arctic wind howled across the frozen sea, a relentless reminder of the unforgiving world surrounding them. The research team stood at the edge of their boat, hearts pounding as they watched the polar bear struggle against an invisible force dragging it down. It wasn't just weak, it was dying. Dr. Mark Reynolds clenched his jaw. The bear had been in this condition for far too long. The barnacles weren't just weighing it down, They had become a part of its suffering. Emma Carter, standing beside him, took a sharp breath. Those wounds, now they're infected. Jacob, the youngest researcher, swallowed hard. How could this even happen? Barnacles don't attach to bears, do they? Mark shook his head. Not unless it's been in the water for days, maybe weeks. A terrible realization settled over them. The bear hadn't been able to get out of the water. Whether it had been trapped by shifting ice and injury or sheer exhaustion, one thing was clear. It had fought alone for far too long. Now, it had nothing left to fight with. The bear's movements were slow, almost mechanical, as if every effort was calculated to conserve the last bit of energy it had. Despite its wild nature, it didn't resist. No snarls, no attempts to flee, just weak, exhausted breathing. Emma took a cautious step forward, lowering herself onto the platform they had extended toward the ice. "It's not fighting us." Jacob's voice was hushed, filled with an unease that none of them wanted to voice. "It doesn't have the strength to." The boat rocked slightly as Mark and another crew member grabbed a long, sturdy pole with a hooked end. It wasn't meant for this kind of rescue, but it was their only chance to pull the bear closer to a stable patch of ice. As they inched forward, the bear lifted its head. Its dark, sunken eyes met Mark's. For a second, time seemed to freeze. There was something in its gaze that struck Mark to his core. It wasn't fear, it wasn't aggression. It was a silent plea. "Help me." Mark had spent years working with wildlife, but never had he seen an animal so close to giving up. They had to act. Now. Emma tightened her grip on the rope they had secured. "If we can just guide it toward that ice sheet, it might be able to pull itself up." Mark nodded, his hands steady as he maneuvered the pole. "Easy, easy." The hook barely touched the bear's side when a shudder ran through its body. Its fur, once thick and powerful, barely covered the raw wounds hidden beneath the barnacles. Some of them had dug into its skin, fusing like parasites. The sight made Emma's stomach turn. This isn't just exhaustion. These wounds are deep. The infections... She hesitated. They might have spread. Jacob exhaled shakily. "If we don't get it out now, it won't survive the night." The team worked carefully, using the pole and rope to guide the bear toward the ice. But even as it drifted closer, its movements grew weaker. With a final desperate push, the bear lifted a paw and tried to grip the ice. The claws scraped against the frozen surface, but its strength gave out. It slid back into the water. Emma gasped. Come on, come on!" Mark's pulse pounded. The bear was slipping away. Then something incredible happened. Instead of panicking, instead of thrashing, the bear tried again. It was barely moving, but there was still something inside it. A will to survive. Mark gritted his teeth and grabbed the rope. "We're not letting it go." Jacob and another crew member rushed to his side, gripping the rope with everything they had. With one final pull, the bear's front legs made it onto the ice. Its breath came in slow, labored gasps. It didn't fight, it didn't flee. It just lay there, trembling, exhausted, but alive. Mark knelt beside it, keeping a safe distance. His voice was barely above a whisper. "We've got you now." The frigid Arctic air bit at their exposed skin as the research team huddled together, forming a plan. The polar bear was alive, but barely. Dr. Mark Reynolds wiped the frost from his beard, his eyes fixed on the massive creature lying motionless on the ice. The weight of barnacles and the toll of exhaustion had drained it of all strength, but they all knew one wrong move could change everything. A weakened bear was still a dangerous bear. Emma Carter adjusted her gloves, her breath visible in the freezing air. "We need to be careful. If we startle it, it might try to escape into the water again, and this time it won't make it." Jacob, shifting uncomfortably, spoke up. "What if it sees us as a threat? A scared animal can be just as dangerous as a strong one." Mark exhaled slowly. "That's why we do this right." Their strategy was simple, but risky. They couldn't use tranquilizers. In the cold, it could slow the bear's heart too much. And they couldn't get too close too quickly. It might lash out. Instead, they decided on a slow approach. A small inflatable boat was prepared, equipped with minimal supplies, ropes, poles, and a lightweight net in case they needed to redirect. The bear. Emma and Jacob would go while Mark and the rest of the team stayed on the main boat, guiding them through earpieces. As the smaller boat drifted away from the safety of the ship, a heavy silence settled over them. The polar bear lay still, its heavy breaths forming small clouds in the icy air. Emma's grip tightened on the paddle as she whispered, "We're getting closer." Jacob nodded, his heart hammering in his chest. Every instinct told him this was dangerous. At just a few feet away, the bear stirred. Its massive head lifted slightly, dark eyes flickering between exhaustion and primal awareness. It saw them. Jacob froze. "Mark, it's watching us." Over the earpiece, Mark's voice was steady. "Stay calm, no sudden movements." Emma swallowed hard. She raised a gloved hand in a slow, non-threatening motion. "We're here to help," she whispered, knowing the bear wouldn't understand but hoping it could sense they weren't a threat. For a moment, it didn't move. Then, it panicked. A deep, guttural growl rumbled from its throat as its instincts took over. With a sudden burst of energy, the bear lunged forward, thrashing violently. The boat rocked dangerously. Emma lost her balance, gripping the edge of the boat just in time. Jacob's breath caught in his throat as the bear swung its massive paw. It missed them by inches. The small boat lurched sideways, tilting dangerously close to the water. Over the radio, Mark's voice snapped, "Back off, now!" But before they could react, the bear made a mistake. It tried to push itself up, its injured limbs trembling under its own weight. The barnacles fused to its fur and skin, tore open deep wounds. The bear let out a sound none of them would ever forget. Phi. Deep, painful, almost human-like cry. It wasn't anger. It wasn't aggression. It was suffering. Jacob, still gripping the boat's edge, saw something change in the bear's eyes. For a brief second, the fight left it. Emma, breathing hard, whispered, "It's too weak to keep going." Mark's voice came through again, softer this time. "It's scared, but it knows it can't fight anymore." Emma hesitated. "So, what do we do now?" Jacob exhaled shakily. "We don't give up." Carefully, they adjusted their approach, this time even slower. The bear's head lowered, its breathing ragged. Its instincts had fought, but reality had won. Now it was just waiting. Mark's voice steadied them. "We move in, carefully, this is our only chance." And so, with measured movements and hearts pounding in their chests, they tried again, knowing that failure was not an option. The Arctic was never forgiving. The research team had known that from the moment they set foot in these icy waters, but now as they fought to save a dying polar bear, the truth of it pressed down on them with a weight they could hardly bear. The bear lay still, its chest rising and falling in slow, uneven breaths. It was fading. Mark Reynolds gripped his radio tightly, his voice calm but firm. "Emma, Jacob, we're running out of time. The ice is shifting, and if we don't act now, we lose the bear." Emma, still crouched in the small rescue boat, wiped a layer of frost from her face. "We need to get these barnacles off fast. Jacob, hand me the cutters." Jacob, kneeling beside her, fumbled through their gear, his fingers stiff from the cold. He pulled out a specialized tool, a long, curved cutter designed to scrape barnacles off without causing further harm. "Got it." Emma took the cutter, her eyes flicking toward the bear. The massive creature didn't move, but its breathing was growing weaker. "Stay with us," she whispered, as if the bear could hear her. Jacob worked quickly, using a rope to stabilize the bear's leg, while Emma started on the barnacles. The first cut was the hardest. The barnacle shell cracked, breaking away from the fur, revealing the raw, infected skin underneath. The bear flinched. Jacob stiffened. "It's still aware." Mark's voice came through the radio. "Be careful. If it panics again, you won't be able to hold it down." Emma nodded, her heart hammering. She worked faster, but every barnacle she removed revealed deeper wounds, more damage. The bear had been suffering for far longer than they had realized. And then nature turned against them. A low, rumbling crack echoed across the ice. Jacob froze. What was that? From the main boat, Mark's voice sharpened. "The ice is shifting." Emma's breath caught in her throat. They were running out of time. Another crack, this time closer. The ice floe beneath the Bear was starting to break apart. Jacob shot Emma a look. "We need to move, now." Emma clenched her jaw. "We're not leaving it." She turned back to the Bear, gripping the last barnacle. "Hold it steady." Jacob tightened his grip on the rope. "Do it." With one final pull, the barnacle snapped free. The Bear let out a deep, guttural groan of pain and relief. Blood seeped from the wounds, but the weight of the barnacles was finally gone. For a moment, everything was still. Then, the ice shifted, again violently. Mark's voice came through, urgent. "Get out of there, now!" Emma grabbed the rope. "We need to get the Bear onto stable ice." But the Bear, weak as it was, sensed the danger. Its instincts kicked in, and before Emma or Jacob could react, it moved. With a final, desperate effort, the Bear dragged itself forward, escaping the collapsing ice behind it. Jacob barely had time to jump back into the boat as the floe broke apart. Emma gasped, gripping the edge of the boat as a massive chunk of ice plunged into the freezing water. For a heart-stopping moment, they thought the Bear would be lost. But then it found its footing. The Bear, now free of its burden, stood on solid ice, weakened, wounded, but alive. Emma, breathless, watched as the Bear lifted its head, and for the first time, its dark eyes met hers. It didn't growl. It didn't run. It just looked at her. A silent acknowledgement, a moment neither of them would ever forget. Jacob let out a shaky breath. "We did it." Mark's voice came through, softer this time. "Yeah, you did." The Arctic had thrown everything it could at them. The ice had tried to break them. The cold had tried to stop them. But they had won. And the Bear, against all odds, had survived. Emma's hands were trembling, not from the Arctic cold, but from the sheer intensity of the moment. They were so close. The barnacles were coming. Off piece by piece, revealing raw, infected skin beneath. Every crack, every snap of a broken shell felt like one step closer to saving the Bear's life. Jacob worked beside her, his face pale, his breath ragged from the frigid air. He used a long tool to scrape away the hardened clusters, while Emma carefully removed the remaining fragments with gloved hands. Each barnacle that fell into the water felt like a victory. But the Bear was barely holding on. Mark's voice crackled through the radio from the boat. "How's it looking?" Emma exhaled, her breath coming out in misty clouds. "The barnacles are nearly off, but—" She glanced at the polar bear's massive body, at the way its breaths was slowing down. "I don't know if we're fast enough." Jacob wiped, his brow though the sweat quickly turned to ice. "We need to hurry. The longer it stays in this state, the harder it'll be for it to recover." The last few barnacles were the biggest, embedded deep in the bear's fur. They had been there for months, maybe years, and now they were coming off, but at what cost? The Bear let out a deep, low groan, a sound that sent a shiver down Emma's spine. She looked into its eyes, tired, worn, but full of something strange. It wasn't fighting them anymore. It wasn't struggling. It was trusting them. She swallowed hard. "Please, don't give up now." Jacob worked quickly, chipping away the last of the barnacles. The Bear barely flinched, its massive body swaying slightly from exhaustion. And then it happened. The final barnacle came loose. It fell to the ice with a dull thud, breaking apart on impact. The team froze. For a moment, nobody moved. Emma's heart pounded in her chest. Would the Bear survive the shock? The weight that had been crippling it for so long was finally gone. But now, with nothing holding it back, would its body have the strength to go on? Jacob slowly stepped back. "Come on, big guy, you're free now." The Bear didn't move. Its head hung low, its body trembling. Too much pain, too much exhaustion. Emma's hands clenched into fists. "Please, please fight." From the boat. Mark's voice was urgent. "It needs to move. If it stays still for too long, its body will start shutting down." Jacob cursed under his breath. "How do we get it to move?" Emma took a slow step closer, her heart hammering. She didn't know if what she was about to do was reckless or brilliant. She knelt down just a few feet away from the bear. Her voice was barely a whisper. "You can do this." The bear let out a slow, rattling breath. Jacob tensed. "Emma?" She ignored him. Her focus was only on the bear. Another breath. Shallow, weak, and then a twitch. Emma's breath caught. The bear shifted slightly. Its claws scraped against the ice. Then, slowly, painfully, it lifted its head. Jacob let out a breath he hadn't realized he was holding. Mark's voice was softer now. "That's it. Come on, buddy." The bear blinked. It breathed. It moved. First a small shift, then a heavy, labored step forward. Its legs wobbled, struggling to support its own weight after so long under the burden of barnacles. But then it took another step. And another. The researchers held their breath as the massive creature staggered forward, its body still weak, but alive. Emma felt something tighten in her chest. Relief, overwhelming relief. Jacob let out a shaky laugh. "He's moving." Emma wiped her eyes, barely realizing that tears had frozen against her lashes. "Yeah, he's moving." Mark's voice came through once more, filled with something none of them had dared feel until now. Hope. Looks like he's got some fight left in him after all. The Arctic had tried to take him. The weight of suffering had nearly broken him. But now, he was free. The icy wind howled across the vast Arctic landscape, carrying with it a sense of both desolation and renewal. The team stood in tense silence, their breath misting in the frigid air as they watched the massive polar bear, finally free. For the first time in what must have been years, it moved without pain. Its first steps were uncertain, hesitant, weak but determined. The weight of the barnacles had been lifted, but the scars of its struggle remained, deep wounds along its thick fur, reminders of a battle against time and nature. Emma could barely breathe as she watched. Would the bear recover? Would it regain the strength it needed to survive in the brutal Arctic wilderness? Jacob, standing beside her, whispered, "Come on, big guy. You can do this." The bear paused for a long moment. The ice beneath its massive paws groaned softly, a quiet protest against the shifting weight. Then, with a deep, shuddering breath, it took another step. And another. Emma exhaled, relief flooding through her veins. The bear moved, slow, shaky, but steady. Each step was a victory, each breath was a defiance of the suffering it had endured. As it made its way toward the open ice, it suddenly stopped. For the first time since they had freed it, it looked back. Emma felt something stir deep in her chest, a silent moment of understanding. The bear's dark eyes met hers, not with fear, not with aggression, but with something different. Jacob swallowed hard. Is it just me, or does he know? Emma couldn't find the words. She didn't need to. The bear lingered for only a few seconds more. Then, as if making a final decision, it turned away. And just like that, it disappeared into the frozen wilderness. Gone. Swallowed by the vast white expanse of the Arctic. The silence that followed was heavy, yet peaceful. Jacob let out a breathless laugh, shaking his head. "I can't believe we actually did it." From the boat, Mark's voice crackled through the radio. "Hell of a thing to witness, huh?" Emma nodded, even though he couldn't see her. Hell of a thing indeed. The team stood there for a long moment, staring at the spot where the bear had vanished. They had done it. They had saved a life today. And yet, as Emma looked out at the endless Arctic ice, a question weighed on her mind. How many others were out there, suffering, unnoticed? How many more animals were trapped in an unforgiving world, bearing the weight of human impact, climate change, and the slow destruction of their home? Jacob seemed to be thinking the same thing. His expression was solemn, his voice quiet. This one got lucky. Emma swallowed the lump in her throat. Yeah, but how many don't? No one had an answer. Because, for every bear they saved, there were countless others they would never find in time. Mark broke the silence. Come on, let's head back. We've got a hell of a report to file. The team slowly made their way back to the boat, the adrenaline of the rescue fading, replaced by a mix of triumph and solemn reflection. As the engine roared to life, sending ripples across the icy waters, Emma took one last look at the horizon. The Arctic was vast, brutal, unforgiving. But today, just for today, they had made a difference, and that was something worth fighting for.